Hello. Today is day 3 of having bees, so it's all still very exciting. But today I thought I'd show off the design elements of this beehive and kind of how I designed this beehive, since it is kind of unique. And I also want to describe how I intend for these beehives to work. But I think first we should talk about design, so let's do that. Okay, so now we're back inside in my childhood bedroom. You can tell that because of the Patriots wallpaper. But let's talk about the design of this beehive. Now, with any design, I needed some baseline parameters to design around. And the first of those is a concept called bee space. And this concept states that any space in your hive under 1/4 of an inch, the bees will fill with propolis, which is kind of like this waxy substance that they use to seal cracks and solidify their hive. And any space in your hive over 3/8 of an inch, the bees will build their honeycomb in. So this leaves us with kind of a narrow gap of 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch where the bees will live but not fill with propolis or fill with honeycomb. So that was design parameter number 1, that any space that I didn't want filled had to be 3/8 of an inch. The second design parameter revolves around kind of industrial beekeeping, which is what most beekeeping supplies are made for. So this is what a traditional beehive looks like. It's called a Langstroth hive, and inside are what are referred to as frames. And that's the term for a rectangle of wood in which the bees build their comb. Frames come in deep, medium, and shallow sizes, and they can be used in a wide variety of different beehive setups depending on what you prefer. Since I didn't build a Langstroth beehive, I built a horizontal hive. I still wanted to make sure that my frames were compatible with Langstroth frames. So if a Langstroth frame looks like that, my frame looks like this. Now, you can tell that there are 2 different sections on this. I'm calling it a double deep frame because each of these sections is the equivalent of a Langstroth deep frame. The reason I have 2 frames stacked on top of each other is because in cold climates, in cold winters, bees will they'll cluster down at the bottom of the hive, and they'll slowly migrate upwards as they eat their honey stores over the winter. And so if you simply have one deep frame, the bees can't go very high because there's only so much space. So in a traditional Langstroth frame, you use 2 deep frames, and so that's what I've built here. The only hiccup, if these were permanently attached, is that for honey extraction, and we're thinking way down the line here, honey extractors, which are these devices that spin the honey frames to get the honey out, they're only set up to handle a max capacity of a deep frame. So what I've done is I've actually put a sliding dovetail joint on these frames so that they can be disassembled. So this now will fit into any honey extractor and can be used like a normal Langstroth beehive, or frame, I should say. The other thing I've done is created another piece, which I'm calling a frame hanger. And this means that these 2 frames are identical. And what that is super useful for is if you ever need to swap the position of these frames for any reason, and there are definitely certain circumstances in which you would want to swap them, they can be swapped because they have the same sliding dovetail joint on either side. So I can now reverse the order of these and stick this back in the frame. One part of the design that I really had to focus on was the amount of play in these sliding dovetails, because I manufactured these out of dry timber, probably around a moisture content of 7 or 8%. But inside the hive, the bees are living and breathing, and they're bringing honey in, which has water content in it. So hives can hover around 50 to 60% humidity. So I added a little bit extra slop in these, a little extra tolerance. So the joints are a little loose right now. But the theory is that when they get put into the hive, they'll get a little more saturated with moisture and swell a little bit, and these joints will tighten up. So I never want them to be super stuck, because I still want to be able to pull them apart. But in theory, they should be a little tighter and a little more precise. So that's how I manufactured these, and just something I was thinking about when I was building these. So with this double deep frame, I know that these sections have to be equivalent of a Langstroth deep frame. So that gives me a length and a depth and a width. And so based off that, I can kind of calculate the rest of the hive dimensions based on how many of these I want to fit in the hive. I know how deep the bottom must be. I know how high the top must be. And then after that, it's just a matter of designing the legs and the roof and kind of everything to fit based around this frame design. I think it's kind of clever. I don't know if it'll work or not. I've never seen this done before, but I'm kind of excited about it. I think it might work. But I will get this out of the way, and we can look at the CAD work that I did. So this whole project was modeled in Fusion 360, which is an Autodesk program. I modeled all of this when I was still over in New Zealand, because I caught the beekeeping bug there. A few of the places we stayed at had bees and beehives, and I kind of caught the bug and decided to try and design my own, because that's kind of how I roll. So let me show you what I've designed here on the computer. Okay, so here we are in Fusion 360, and you can see this is my beehive. It has all of its components over here organized nice and neatly. I had plenty of time to do this, so I really worked hard on it. But let me take you through some of the features, and I'll try and explain a bit more about the hive. So let us first go into the frames. So here are the frames. You can see that I have stacked multiples together. So there's a group of 5 double frames, a group of 10, and then another group of 5. So in actuality, this is the equivalent of about 40 deep Langstroth frames. And that's, from what I can gather, about equivalent to what a healthy, strong bee colony would require in a traditional Langstroth beehive. So I've tried to mimic the capacity of a traditional hive, if not the shape. One thing to note is that if I was to run out of space, say they fill up all of these frames with honeycomb, I can always pull some out and replace them with new ones, because I did make some extra. But here you can see, so the bees will build their honeycomb in between these frames. So if we look at just one double frame, which is what I've just shown you, the bees will tend to build their comb, hopefully, in these sections and out to about the edge of the frame. If they do that, there will be 3/8 of an inch between each frame, which means there will be adequate bee space, and that will allow the bees to move up and down in between each frame, and everything will be nice and orderly. Let's now look at the hive main box, is what I call this. So this was the main box which houses all of the frames, and they hang, the frames do, off of these small ledges. There's one on the back wall and one on the front wall there. You can see I designed in all of the windows, so I knew where to place those. And I should also mention here that this whole build was designed around using 1x material and 2x4s. Down here you can see my bottom board. This is now screened in, but you can see the framework that I put in right there. And that is the main hive. Oh, let me point out the entrances. There are 3 entrances in between what I'm calling the awning and the porch, or the landing board, I guess. So these outside entrances I can open up in the peak of the season when the nectar flow is really strong, and allow the bees to come and go straight from the honey frames, which were the outside frames, out to the pollen source and the nectar sources. And this inner entrance can be used for bees that are coming and going towards the brood nests. So this is the main box. Now we have a bottom, we have sides. The inner cover, because we have 2 different forms of cover, these inner slats act as the inner cover. And what's really helpful about these, and I'll point this out later when we go back out to the hives, is you can remove 1 or 2 of these inner slats to access 1 or 2 frames, and there's no need to expose the entire hive to the sunlight, which the bees don't like. Now the outer roof is a gabled roof, which just means it's slanted. And the benefit of this style roof is it really promotes ventilation of the hive. So you can see these big vent holes, which are screened in on the actual hive. I just didn't model that in. And then we can just pop the legs back on there. The legs have been designed to be made out of 1 8-foot 2x4 to conserve material. Similarly, all of these window sections were designed so that they would all fit into 1 piece of plexiglass that I could buy from Home Depot. So anyways, this is the main CAD model, and it allowed me to make drawings based off of each part. And this was really helpful in manufacturing these pieces, because I could just make a drawing for every single component and then make the components. So it really helped in assembly. So now that I've given you a look at my CAD model and drawings, and I've given you kind of a rough idea of my design parameters and how I went around designing this, let's go take a peek at how the beehive is actually operating, or how I hope it's operating out in our backyard. So this is the front of the beehive, and you can probably see some bees coming and going. Hey, Bana. Bana is also very interested in the beehive. Bana, out! Come on. Hey, come on. So the bees are actually coming and going through a small entrance in between these 2 boards. I've got it narrowed off to about a 2-inch section by 3/8 of an inch, and that's just so the bees, when they're weak, they need a small entrance because they can't quite defend their own hive yet. But when they're nice and strong, I can open that up to 12 inches wide, and they'll have no problem defending their own hive, and then they can come and go as they please. There's also a small top entrance, which they appear to be using quite frequently as well, and that's also great for the winter. But this is where the bees come and go, so all the bee activity mostly is around the front of the hive right here. But they're docile bees, so I'm sitting here and talking to you, and they're flying around and not paying me much mind because I'm not threatening them. So hey, Bana, out, out. Trying to bite him. So this is the back of the beehive, and this is the side that actually faces our house. And it's got a few features that you can access from the back, which is ideal because the bees come and go obviously from the front, and so there's a little bit less bee activity back here. So starting at the bottom, I put in some rails so you can slide in boards, which can either close or open up the bottom, since the actual bottom of the beehive is a screened material to allow airflow. But you can put in, right now I have this piece of pink insulation foam just to kind of cut down on some of the airflow going through there so the colony doesn't get too spooked. Speaking of the bottom board, it is removable, so if I ever need to clean the hives, that can be pulled out and hosed off or brushed off. So that's very neat. Moving upwards, there are 3 small windows on the back here. There are 2 on either side as well. And these are completely unnecessary, but it's kind of a fun little thing that you can open these windows and peek inside. You don't want to do it for too long because bees do not like the light. That's why they build their hives in trees and logs where it's dark. So we keep these shut for most of the time, but you can open them up for a few seconds to take a look at what the bees are doing inside. And then up top is actually where the roof opens up. So the handle for the hinged roof is right here. I'm not going to open the hive up right now because I don't want to disturb the colony, but I did shoot some footage of that a few days ago so I can show you guys what the inside of this hive looks like. Alright, so enough about the outside of the hive. Let's get to the good stuff, the inside. So, first off, a hinged roof I think is so much nicer than just a pick up and put on the ground roof. It's just so much more convenient. But anyways, getting to the top. Here you can see the inner cover with these slats. Some of them have little ventilation holes which are screened in. But then this is my style of a top feeder. So the bees can come up through this slot in the middle. There'll be some sugar syrup on either side that they can feed from. And it's just a really convenient way to feed the bees. So, removing the inner cover, we get to the inside of the beehive. So we'll just put these to the side for now. So, the first thing, this is a standard, what is referred to as a deep frame. So this rectangle is where the bees will build their honeycomb. Now a unique thing that I've done, and who's to say if it'll work or not, is that I've actually stacked 2 frames on top of each other with a sliding dovetail joint. So in theory you should be able to break these frames apart and have 2 standard size frames, but in essence they act as one in the hive. Now this bottom frame I've wired with some stainless steel wire, and that's just to help support the comb, especially during honey extraction. But I also think that it'll help, since we're inexperienced beekeepers, if we were to tilt the frame a little bit, I don't want the comb to break off. So to start with, when I install the bees, I have 5 of these, what I'm calling double frames in the hive. So that's the equivalent of 10 standard deep frames. Now on either side of the frames, I have these follower boards, as they're referred to. And they're just a solid board that goes all the way down to the bottom. And it essentially shrinks the size of the hive. So the entrance is right in the middle, and the bees will have this amount of area to work with. Now, as the colony expands, I can shift these follower boards outward and slot in more frames as the bees need them to build more comb. Now, eventually what I'm hoping is that the bees will build all the way out to these metal pieces, and these are called queen excluders. And they're called that because the spacing in between these wires is just enough so that worker bees can get through, but the queen cannot. So in theory, the queen should be kept within these 10 double frames, and then on either side, I have room for 5 more double frames. This is where all of the surplus honey will be stored, and that's where we will harvest it from, is just these outer sections. This whole intersection, we will leave whatever is produced there for the bees. So they will need it as they go through the cold winters here in Massachusetts. So one benefit with these inner covers is that when the bees no longer need to be fed because there's a strong nectar source, I will remove the top feeder, and I have many more slats that I can just cover the entire hive with. So the benefit here is that if I want to access a frame or 2, I can just pull up the 2 slats that I need to access that frame. The rest of the hive will remain covered, and those bees won't be disturbed quite as much as if I had one solid top board that I had to remove even if I wanted to inspect a single frame. So that's just a little insight into what was going on in my mind when I designed these guys. I really have my fingers crossed because there's no basis for the double frame working. That is, as far as I can tell, a completely unique solution that I made. But I do have hopes for it. But anyways, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to try and answer them. There was pretty much a reason for everything I did on these hives. Every component was designed for a reason. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.